Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. I am currently the editor of Roadkill 6, Texas Horror by Texas Writers, and today I am editing The Teeth by Jacklyn Baker. So I know I say this a lot, but this is one of my favorite stories in the anthology. It is definitely one of the most disturbing stories. It's the story that has the most body horror in it, and it is going to be the opening story of the anthology. The opening lines to this story hooked me right away, and I'm going to go ahead and read the first few lines so that you guys can see exactly what I mean. How many teeth? A sink full. No, Jonah Harper replied. That is not a quantifiable amount. How many? I just love that opening for so many reasons. Like, for one thing, how many teeth? A sink full. I agree with Jonah Harper. That is not a quantifiable amount. It is such an odd unit of measurement that it just asks so many questions. And I love Jonah's nonchalant response. That is not a quantifiable amount. You're going to need to be more specific. I just love that. He's just so down to earth and not even fazed by the bizarreness of that answer. And then that question, how many teeth, is so puzzling until you read the story and understand the context. I was just pulled into the story right away by the opening, and as soon as I finished reading the story, I knew that this was going to be the perfect opening for the anthology. So this story, The Teeth, is about a medical examiner slash forensic dentist who is investigating a series of homicides. Crime scene investigators discover several gallon-sized bags full of human teeth in a sink, hence the answer, a sink full of teeth. And throughout the course of the story, the medical examiner is trying to examine these teeth and figure out how many victims there are, and he's helping the investigators close up the case. I love the resolution to this story. It's puzzling, but in a way that feels satisfying, and like I said, this story has a lot of body horror in it, particularly, imagery of teeth falling out, which is particularly disturbing to me. I have so many nightmares where my teeth are falling out. I think that it's a very common human fear, and this story really takes advantage of that fear. I'm going to go ahead and get started editing. So I just finished editing The Teeth, and man, that was just as disturbing and just as good as I remembered. So there was a few changes that I made to this story in addition to line edits and proofreading. For one thing, there was this one part of the story whenever the CSI is bringing in the bags of teeth where the writer compared the bags of teeth to, the bags that they give away at carnivals, like the little goldfish swimming in the little plastic bags. And I understand where the author maybe got the idea for the comparison because, they both involve plastic bags, but it just didn't work for me in this story. I guess because, a goldfish at a carnival is a very whimsical image. And aside from the fact that they both involve plastic bags, it's just not a great comparison. They don't feel the same. One feels very soft and watery, the other one is hard. They don't sound the same when you squish them. Although I don't know why you'd want to squish a bag of teeth. But it's just not a great comparison overall. So instead, I changed it to the teeth arrived in clear plastic bags, clanking together like a jar of marbles tipped over. So instead of trying to compare the human teeth to something else that's disturbing, I decided to pick something that's a little bit more familiar. Most people have some kind of memory bank of, the sound of two marbles clanking together. So it's easier to imagine that sound of two human teeth clanking together in a bag. So by juxtapositioning something that's very disturbing with a sound that people are more familiar with, it makes the sound in the story of the teeth clanking together feel more realistic. And there's a few other things that I changed as well. For one thing, there was this one part where the detective asks the medical examiner, okay, how long do you think this is going to take? And for me, that just didn't seem realistic. For one thing, the medical examiner doesn't answer to the detective. He doesn't work for him, so he's not going to answer to him. And another thing is that a medical examiner isn't going to know how long it's going to take for them to do their job. It takes as long as it takes, So it just didn't feel like an appropriate question. What made more sense to me was for the detective to ask the medical examiner, how many victims do you think there are? Because that information is pertinent to the detective and what they're working on. So I ended up changing that that question from how long is this going to take to how many victims do you think there are. But other than that, the story remained relatively unchanged, and I absolutely love it, and I cannot wait for you guys to read this messed up nightmare of a story. Okay, so I just edited The Sons of Billy Clay by Stephen Graham Jones. This is another one where I'm not sure if I'm actually going to film myself staring at the screen, because that is exactly what I did the entire time. I think I made like 4 changes throughout the entire story, and all of it was just like very, very small grammatical things. But yeah, I love this story so much. It's about this guy who started working at a prison, and he's developing a rapport with his supervisor, and the supervisor is telling him about a serial killer who has been reincarnated into a bull. They trap the souls of these violent prisoners and serial killers into bulls. Well, the bull is apparently like super aggressive and end up murdering like the writers and stuff. I love the ending. I don't want to hype it up too much, but it's so good that like when I revised it the first time, well, I've only revised it twice and I'm probably not going to do it again, but when I revised it the first time, I actually forgot the ending and I was riveted all over again. I'm like, wait a minute, how does this end? I was just as impressed the second time reading it. So really good story. I hardly had to do any edits. The story is fantastic and so bizarre, and I love it because of its weirdness. Some of the stories in this collection I love because they're heartfelt or because they're particularly gruesome. This story I love because it is weird. I'm really excited for you guys to read this story. It's so good that it's made me decide to start checking out other works by this author, by Stephen Graham Jones. I had started reading The Only Good Indians. I have not finished that, and I really also want to read My Heart is a Chainsaw, which I have on Kindle Unlimited, not Kindle Unlimited. It's an advanced reader copy, so I have it on my Kindle from NetGalley, so I also really want to read that too. That's how good the story is that I was like, I need to check out other works by this author. So I hope that you guys like it, and that is all the editing I'm doing today. It's gonna be a light day. I just finished editing Fandango by E.R. Bills. So in this story, a man named Dexter dies under very mysterious circumstances, and his grandson and his friends come together after his death, and they kind of speculate about what could have happened. It appears as though he got caught in a sandstorm, even though there was no record of a sandstorm taking place at that time at that location. But his vehicle is flipped over and it's full of sand, and on his deathbed he was mumbling something incoherently that his friends couldn't piece together. As the story progresses, we eventually figure out what happened to him. One of the things I love most about this story is the conversation that Dexter's friends have whenever they're sharing their wartime stories and talking about their experiences in war. They talked about how whenever they were fighting the Germans, that there was a sandstorm that came and sort of saved them all, and that Dexter had wanted to try to help the Germans, but the commander had told him that if he tried to help them, then he was going to shoot him, so he wasn't able to do so. But it's just a really interesting concept, this idea of this character having compassion for the enemy, for the people that he's supposed to be killing, and yet he doesn't want them to die a horrible death, even though it's his mission to kill them. That was the part of the story that really stuck with me the most, the idea of this soldier having so much compassion for the enemy. This is a story about hauntings. It's kind of a story, almost in a Final Destination way, about men who escape death and later on death comes to revisit them. But, you know, at its core, I think it really explores what it means to have humanity even in the worst times. And it's also about love too, you know, it's about love for your fellow human even whenever they're the enemy. And it's about, you know, a grandfather's love for his son. That kind of shows up at the end of the story, and I can't really get too much into that without getting into spoilers, but you know, the ending is actually very emotional and heartfelt. I didn't do a whole lot of editing for this story. E.R. Bills had sent me one version of the story, which I read, I loved it, and then he sent me a revised version. The revised version was really close to the original, but there was a few tweaks he made to the ending, and some of the things that he added I felt worked really well towards making the ending more emotional, but there was a few things he took out that I really liked. So one of the changes E.R. Bills made to the second version was the title. Originally the title was Fandango, and then he changed it to something else, and then it got changed back to Fandango after we had a conversation about it. One of the reasons why the story is called Fandango is that in the story the character is thinking about the movie Fandango, and he can't think of the title of the movie, but he describes the story. It's a war story, which ties in closely to the theme of this story. One of the meanings of Fandango is a foolish or useless act or thing, which, is a perfect description of war. So obviously the main reason and the original reason that the story was called Fandango is because of its relation to the movie. But one of the reasons that the author decided to change the title back to Fandango is because of the meaning of the word. War is completely senseless, and that's a huge theme of the story, so I'm really glad that the title stayed Fandango. So it was the author's decision to stick with Fandango as the title. He's the one that looked up the word and made that epiphany, and him telling me that is just kind of what made me really excited that he decided to keep the title. The only thing I did is that I Frankensteined. I took a couple lines from the original ending and I put them into this revised version, and I just kind of Frankenstein the two endings together to take the best parts of the first story and combine it with, the emotional elements of the second story. So it sounds like I did a lot when I explained it that way, but I really didn't. I just took 2 or 3 sentences from the first ending and put it in the second one. I just wanted to make sure that some of the things that I liked in the original ending didn't disappear in the second version. The second version was more emotional and sentimental, so it was better in some ways, but I did like certain things in the first part of the story, particularly the reference to the movie Fandango, and I wanted to keep that in the ending. And eventually I was really happy with the endings. We were able to keep all of the things that I liked from the first and the second ending. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On this channel, I post book reviews, writing advice, horror content, and vlogs. And be sure to check out Roadkill 6, Texas Horror by Texas Writers, coming soon. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.